Okay, let's just make sure everything is currently working as it's supposed to work, and we will get started. We will just double check and make sure everything's good, and after I see that everything is good, we'll go ahead and get going. Okay, everything's looking good on the YouTube. Let me just share this on ye old Twitter. And after we share it on Twitter, we will get rocking and rolling. So just bear with us for 1 minute. Thank you so much. Okay. All right. Okay, I think we are officially formally posted, which means it is time to get going. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Whoever you are, wherever you are, I am Dr. Patrick Lockwood, and this is UnShrink Me. And if you are new to my YouTube channel and you are new to my podcast, UnShrink Me is a mental health podcast. Now, one of the ways in which it's unique and different than other mental health podcasts is this is not really a review of the literature podcast. This is not an advice podcast. This is actually a criticism podcast, believe it or not. And so what I'm here to do is to discuss, describe, critique pop psychology and other types of things you would see online that may or may not be so helpful for people seeking out mental health services. So my only goal, genuinely, of this podcast is to make sure that people who are consumers of mental health, psychiatry, psychology, etc. services aren't getting bamboozled. I want to protect the consumers from people who are malicious and selling snake oil, but also to protect consumers from the unwittingly pseudoscientific in the profession. That's the only thing I'm trying to do here. That's all I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to attack a particular person or a particular idea. I'm just here to say what I think is ethical and valid according to both the research and clinical wisdom and clinical experience. But also, a lot of the pop psychology stuff that catches fire may actually not be as helpful as you think it is. But also I want to make sure that if you are engaging in these things, that you're going into it with both of your eyes open, fully informed as much as humanly possible. So that is the spirit of this podcast. If you find it helpful, interesting, engaging, or even funny, because I tell a joke at the end every time, please like, share, and subscribe. Help me get the word out, protect people so they can get better help more frequently. Thanks so much. Without further delay, we have so many interesting topics today that we'll be talking about. And if you're here watching, please feel free to come chat because I always read the chats and try to have a little bit of banter with the people that are here. So I look forward to chatting with whoever shows up here. So the topics for today include one article on masculinity, the pros and cons of the particular article, in addition to some topics about good and bad therapy, school mental health screenings, oversimplifying what's considered treatment. So what's called treatment online by many influencers and psychiatrists and psychologists. I want to talk about that. And living for other people's approval. That's another topic we'll have. And as always, we'll check in on Justin Garson, who always has some critique about the profession, which sometimes I agree with and sometimes I don't. understandably so. So those are the topics for today. And if there's anything you'd like for me to talk about or like for me to critique or discuss and explore, unpack, let me know, and I'll happily do that for you. I'm on Twitter. My handle is @DrLockwood. Let me know how I can be of service. So today, as always, we are not formally NOT, not sponsored by Celsius. However, this stuff is great. So because it's great, I always have some. And by the time I get like a little bit way into it, I'm a little more energized, a little more jazzed, a little more talkative. So helps with that too, with the entertainment value of things. Okay, so let's start with Justin Garson. Okay. All right. I'm going to tweet this real quick, as I always do, and then we're going to talk about it. Okay. All right. So on July 21st, a couple of weeks ago, Justin said, most mental health problems can be solved by getting the fuck out of whatever toxic environment you're in, a relationship, a job, a home situation. But psychiatry's main goal is to keep you functioning in those environments as long as possible. So let me get to this, and then Jonathan, I see you chimed in about school mental health screening, so I will jump to that second since you brought it up. So I want to start with this critique from Justin. So Justin Garson said again, most mental health problems can be solved, SOLVED, can be solved by getting the fuck out of whatever toxic environment you're in, a relationship, a job, a home situation. But psychiatry's main goal is to keep you functioning, in quotes, in those environments as long as possible. So here's what I said about that. Blaming toxic environments for schizophrenia or bipolar or PTSD is idiotic. Mental illness has a complex causality and usually requires multiple types of help or support. Environmental management can help, but your shitty job isn't making you manic. So just to be very clear about this, I half agree with Justin in the sense that many people with verified, genuine mental illnesses, serious bipolar, serious schizophrenia, serious substance use disorders, etc. Many people with real mental health problems do have a variety, a list of environmental issues that should be solved if they can be solved. So I completely agree that many people with mental health problems are made sicker by their environments, or worse, their environmental stressors maintain their illness. In fact, when you're doing a healthy, accurate clinical screening and assessment, and then a conceptualization, when you're trying to conceptualize the patient's presenting problem and their illness, you're supposed to factor in environmental variables that actually maintain the illness, because sometimes biological variables maintain the illness, like mood reactivity, etc. But sometimes environmental variables are worse and harder to manage than the biological variables. It's actually very common that people's romantic partner are contributing to the illness, or their parents, or their siblings, or their poverty, or their home environments full of lead and mold and all these things. There's so many very obvious, very real environmental variables which do not get adequately addressed by most therapists. So I'm very much in agreement with Justin about the fact that if people with serious mental health problems actually did change their environment or manage their environment better, or manage their relationship with the people, places, and things around them better, they would get better quicker and stay better longer. That's 100% true. There's research in schizophrenia that confirms that, and major depression, and substance use disorders, and eating disorders that perfectly confirms what Justin is saying, which is that environments are a huge part of the problem. However, as always, at least my experience with Justin is, most of the things that he tweets are genuinely all or nothing statements. So in this case, he's making the all or nothing statement that mental illness is all socially constructed, basically. He's taken the Brian Lowry approach to things, which is just not true, because bipolar exists everywhere on the planet. Personality disorders exist everywhere on the planet, right? So many of these illnesses happen in greater or lower frequencies because of genetics, because of environment, because of social norms and food and all these things, but they're never zero. There's no culture on the planet with zero illness, right? And so Justin is absolutely 100% wrong about the fact that mental illness is only environmental. You can't get a better job and no longer have bipolar. I've tried with some of my bipolar patients, and like changing their environment, environmental management is important. It's part of IPSRT to help people with bipolar. However, genuinely speaking, you cannot exercise your way out of depression. You cannot exercise your way out of bipolar or PTSD. I think the gym and exercise is seriously under-recognized as an important variable in mental health. So I'm a gym bro. I'm all about it in every way, shape, and form, and it's not curing PTSD. If you're having flashbacks all night, there's a good chance a little bit of a medication like Prazosin, for instance. Again, I'm not a psychiatrist, don't fire me, but like meds like that might even help with your nightmares. That being said, no medication is a cure. No lifestyle change is a cure. People with genuine mental illness absolutely have to do multiple things to get better. They can't just take meds. Some of them don't even need meds. They can't just do therapy. Some of them don't really get much out of therapy. Some of them need more severe interventions. Some of them need to leave their very toxic families, like Justin's talking about. So like, I'm completely in agreement in a very limited way. But the problem is he's making a generalization. He's overgeneralizing, to use the CBT term. And that's fucking stupid, because people with severe mental illness can't just quote unquote get out of toxic environments. So that's enough about that. Thank you, Justin, for always being grist for the mill. I mean you no disrespect, but some of the things you say are really stupid, dude. So let's go to this thing about mental health screening. And my friend, colleague, Jonathan Cogburn, popped in here and said, school mental health screening is a hot topic in Texas right now, which I believe is where he practices. They just passed legislation that may prevent school counselors from using the Columbia suicide screening or anything similar. Jonathan, do you know why they banned the Columbia? What was the rationale for it? Because this article I'm going to talk about has some relevance to that, I think. So, excuse me. So there's this person on Twitter named Daniel Buck, who I think is a reporter. And I'll repost this so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay. So Daniel Buck, his handle is at Mr. Mr. Daniel Buck. Mr. Daniel Buck. And here's the post that Daniel put out earlier today. So there's a screenshot of an article from the Chicago Tribune that he's quoting and discussing. And the article from the Chicago Tribune says this: Illinois schools to offer mental health screenings under the bill Governor Pritzker signed in Evanston. This optional proactive screenings are the first in the nation, he says. So optional proactive screenings is the way the article is titled. So Daniel said, I'm not a fan of this. Number one, it's not the school's job to do mental health screening. And two, methinks this will result in lots of false positives as we continue to pathologize normal human emotions. So there's a phrase that he said. And I'm going to find the original. Okay, so I'm going to find the original article and talk about it. But here's what Daniel said. He's not a fan. The second reason he's not a fan, because A, it's not the school's job, but B, importantly, it's going to over-pathologize kids. It's going to pathologize the normal. Because we're screening so much, you're going to get more false positives, is his logic, which is generally true, essentially. So the new bill is Bill SB 1560, which supposedly requires all school districts to provide screening in grades 3 through 12 at least once a year, starting in the 2027 school year. So all school districts in Illinois or Chicago or Illinois, will have grades 3 through 12 doing a once yearly screening. They're going to partner with psych hospitals to inform patients about the state's Beacon, which is behavioral health care and ongoing navigation portal as a pathway to care. So it's going to get more people into care. So the school board, so this is where this is a really stupid idea, just so I want everyone to hear this as abundantly clearly as possible. So the bill calls on the Illinois School Board to create guidelines for screening, and then the state will pay for whatever program they create. So let me tell you why this is horribly stupid. So people that are on school boards are typically administrators with a master's degree or a doctorate degree in education or some junk like that. And people on school boards have no clue how to do mental health screening because they don't know anything about testing and assessment. Most people on these school boards are not licensed psychologists. So even as a licensed psychologist, I wouldn't dare put my name on a program for screening at the state level or the district level. It's really a stupid idea because administrators have no clue how to run these programs. Treatment centers barely do this well as it is because mandated screenings and assessment by insurance for treatment and rehab and stuff is also bullshit and not done scientifically well. And so very few people actually do assessment and screening for mental health very well. Not the National Institute of Drug Abuse, not most treatment centers, very few clinics, etc., very few schools. And so the idea that school administrators are going to do a better job of this than licensed psychologists or anyone else is terrifying to me. Governor Pritzker, if you can somehow hear me, dear Lord, please don't let school boards and administrators decide this. Find psychiatrists and psychologists who know what the hell they're doing to actually create this screening process if you're going to do it at all. So the spirit of this, I can kind of understand because preventative medicine is the cheapest medicine. So let me try and steel man this idea to everyone commenting because there's a lot of people chatting right now and I'll get to you in a second. But here's the deal. It's totally great that the state of Illinois wants to do a better job of preventative care. Preventative care is awesome. All of the public health research shows that primary and secondary intervention is way cheaper and more effective than tertiary intervention where the illness is already out of control. So let me give Governor Pritzker a shout out for at least in spirit trying to do the correct thing. But what's really stupid is letting the school boards or some for-profit industry that doesn't necessarily have their best intentions in mind create this structure for you. It's a terrible idea because administrators don't know anything about testing and assessment. All they know is about standardized school testing, but they don't know shit about mental health or screening and assessment. I doubt they have any actual credible psychologist on staff in any of these districts. And I'll eat my hat if I'm wrong about that. So it's a great idea because we're doing preventative care. Preventative care is cheaper and we can spend a lot of money up front to keep people from getting ill later on. That's a good idea. That's what all the public health research that I'm aware of says is effective. Here's what's terrible about this. It's the school board and the administrators trying to create and design this process. Terrible idea. Hire a psychologist. Hire a consulting firm in Illinois. I'm a consultant here in California. I do this for a living. But people out there's got to be some good psychologists that you can work with who do testing and assessment for a living, who could do this correctly and ethically. But if you're going to get a principal or some school board administrator who knows nothing about this, they're a lawyer or a nurse or a whatever, finance person, real estate person, they don't know what the fuck they're talking about. So that's terrible. It's a terrible idea. Let me scroll back up. Okay. So Jonathan had some comments on this, so I want to go back to it. So he said it's been, I think, banned in Texas for people in schools to use the Columbia Suicide Screener. And he said, I think it's coming from concerns about universal mental health interventions and indoctrination. Oh, so it's like a right-wing thing in Texas. And to preserve parental rights. on the more positive explanation side of that, which fine, must have consent for any screening. Fair enough, right? I think parents should be aware and be able to consent for screening their kids. And then Mountain Girl says it's a terrible idea. I think I generally agree. Jonathan says Daniel's very grumpy, and I agree that schools shouldn't be a primary source of screening. We shouldn't be doing mental health stuff at tier 1, all students. No, I mean, screening all students is almost always a waste of time. There's zero research that I'm aware of in like public psychiatric mental health that says nationwide screening is a great idea. Now, if you go to smaller socialist countries like the Scandinavian folks, where they have a homogenous culture and they have the bankroll for it and the system set up for it, it's probably more effective because you have a more homogenous culture where you can do things and the culture is good for that. But you live in a pluralistic society here in the US. And in this pluralistic melting pot culture place, nationwide screenings aren't going to be as effective because you're going to use measures which are standardized for one kind of group of people at one time massively. That doesn't make any sense. If the measure isn't standardized for immigrants, for instance, it may not be as effective because maybe they don't have as much familiarity with like English, for instance. So you have to be very careful about these measures. Like, you're supposed to use these measures for the populations that they were best designed and normed on. And most screening measures were not normed on all groups of people from all backgrounds. You know, one of the classes I've taught for my university is a disorders-based class where one of the assignments is we evaluate the screeners for it, and students are always horrified at the psychometric validity of most of these screeners and how they don't have much normative data across most cultures because they don't. And so it's really important, whoever is designing this bill or this legislation, these protocols, dear God, anyone in Illinois who is listening, anyone who has friends who are mental health providers in Illinois, talk to me. I will happily consult. We'll figure it out. I'll give my feedback for free or whatever. Like, let's do it right if you're going to do it, but don't do it massively. It doesn't make any sense. There's no good research that says you're supposed to do that. That's a terrible idea. So, dear God, what a terrible idea. Please don't do that. Horrible idea. All right. So that's what I'll say. Again, Governor Pritzker, I appreciate what you're doing because you're trying to help engage in preventative medicine and make preventative medicine normative. And I think that's an awesome idea because preventative medicine is the best medicine. We know for a fact that you can save money by treating illnesses earlier on in their development. And most serious mental health conditions, bipolar, substance use disorders, personality issues, things like that, they start to develop earlier in adolescence and get progressively worse up through 2025. And so treating people in their late teens or early 20s is the best time to get them help. So please, definitely do not massively screen because you'll get a lot of people who overreport and underreport, and the data will just be garbage, essentially. Excuse me. All right. Mountain Girl has a comment here. Says, adolescence involves tremendous psychological change, and that's natural and healthy. Trained professionals are needed to distinguish between that and something that needs intervention. Nuance matters. Absolutely. Couldn't have said it better. Because even trained professionals will overdiagnose, especially if they're the kind of person that, like, for every nail there's a hammer, right? They're ADHD specialist and everyone has ADHD. They're autism spectrum specialist and everyone has autism. So you got to be careful about that too, because whoever you bring in, if they're ed psychologists, who I have lots of problems with, they probably also are overly focused on the things that they're specifically trained on. So clinical psychologists are your best bet. Even though there's many shady, not very smart, not very well trained clinical psychologists, I have my limitations. You know, there are people that can do this correctly. And so if you do convenience sampling or stratified sampling, there's ways to do this where you're not just giving every kid some like PHQ-9 or the RACMAS, or the Reynolds Child Manifest Anxiety Scale. Like, not every person, not every adolescent should just be given a community sample scale. That's terrible. So please don't do that, Governor Pritzker. I appreciate what you're trying to do. But A, do not let administrators do this. And B, do not just screen every kid every year from 3rd grade through 12th grade. That's a terrible idea. What you should do is you should screen based upon obvious behavioral issues and only have kids screened by actual professionals who are trained to assess for serious mental health problems. So clinical psychologists, not educational psychologists, not even school psychologists. That's what I would recommend. But what would I know? I don't live in Illinois and I'm not licensed there, so you can sue me or whatever. However, I've seen this movie play before, and it's always a waste of time and money. And there's overdiagnosis and underdiagnosis, and you don't help as much as you think you're going to help. So that's that. All right. Next up on the similar train of thought, similar plane, is a psychiatrist. I believe he's a psychiatrist online. His handle is at NT Fabiano, Fabiano, Nicholas Fabiano. Apparently he's a psychiatrist. And so Nicholas has a pretty big following, and he says some good stuff and shares some interesting research. However, sometimes he does the guru thing, which really bugs the crap out of me because, life is very complicated. Mental illness is very complicated. And when we propose simple solutions to complicated and complex problems, we're going to screw people up. We're going to give people false hope, and that is unethical. Okay? So here's what he said. I'm going to retweet it right now so we all know what I'm talking about. Okay. So here's what he said. He said this 3 days ago. He said, music is an underrated treatment for depression. I'll say that again. So this is what Nicholas said. Dr. Fabiano, he said, music is an underrated treatment for depression. Here's what I said. I am begging you, Nicholas, to stop saying things like this. The most charitable take is, quote unquote, coping skill for depression, not treatment. Elevating music to the level of treatment, in quotes, is misleading. And some people had a problem with this, unsurprisingly, because here's the thing. As a clinical psychologist, I can tell you, even though I'm not giving anybody any advice right now, I'm just telling you my experience. I'm sharing a story, so don't fucking sue me. Here's the deal. Many things that we all love that are awesome for basically all human beings, like eating well and having good sex and going to the gym and going on a walk and getting sun and getting a hug and playing with your pets, and all these things are awesome. Literally. I think that it's so amazing that we can feel better by doing these simple things, like getting a hug and going on a walk and getting laid and going to the gym and going on a run and hanging out with friends. Like I hung out with one of my good psychologist friends this morning, missed him dearly, and it was awesome to see him and his daughter. But like, calling any of the things I just listed treatment is extremely stupid. And here's why it's stupid. Number one, like I said, it's misleading. Okay? So I have an ethical obligation per my ethics code. The American Psychological Association, as much as I think they're credulous idiots and they're not really protecting consumers anymore like they used to, and I don't think they care about research like they used to, so I have problems with the APA. However, I still like their ethics code, and I still try to live by it because I think it's correct in most ways. And so we are supposed to, as psychologists, protect consumers by not creating false advertisements of our services and misleading them about the benefits of treatment. We are not psychologists. Any professional, but psychologists are not supposed to mislead patients about the potential benefits of our treatment. And so, literally speaking, there are 0 peer-reviewed papers that said you had some drastic decrease in symptoms of major depressive disorder over a long period of time by listening to music. I'm going to say that again very slowly so even the kids can hear it in the back who are a little slow. There are 0 peer-reviewed papers that say listening to music or even playing music or singing provides substantial symptom relief better than placebo for people with major depressive disorder long term. No such data exists. You will find 0 studies that say music cured my depression or substantially relieved my depression. It does not exist. And so when Nicholas is saying music is an underrated treatment for depression, he is literally violating whatever his ethics code as a psychiatrist is and mine as a psychologist. It's not scientifically true. And the moment we have some peer-reviewed papers that show the integration of music therapy, which is a real thing, or actual listening to music or singing music actually does that, I will eat my hat on YouTube. I will do it. But it doesn't exist. And so as I'm a classically trained vocalist, I like to sing. I play the guitar. I play the piano. I love music. Some of my patients are musicians and music keeps them sane in some ways. So I get the flavor of what he's trying to say. The vibe is good, which is a lot of people are helped by music. A lot of people, when they're struggling with depression, start to lose their relationship with music. And so I think that's a crime or a tragedy. I think it's terrible that people who are really struggling and suffering have no relationship with music anymore. So do I believe as a professional and as a person that music is a good thing? I think music is awesome. I think music can soothe us and be a coping skill. That's why I said what I said. Here's the deal though. If you think that music is a treatment, as in it has substantial evidence and will do something drastic to drastically change symptoms over time and promote remission of symptoms, because that's what treatments typically do, then you are wrong. Okay? So, Nicholas, you are scientifically and ethically off base by saying that music is an underrated treatment. It might be a sort of underrated coping skill, but I don't think most people genuinely believe music sucks and you shouldn't care about music. Mountain Girl says, exactly, managing is not curing. And you know what? Almost everyone with a serious mental health problem or even a more mild mental health problem needs better management skills. Lifestyle change, coping skills, management skills, 100%. Management is part of the process of helping people with mental illness. But management is not treatment. Managing and treating are 2 different things. I'm going to say that again for the slow kids in the back. Managing mental illness is not the same thing as treating mental illness. For instance, just to give a super crystal clear example for PTSD, many people with PTSD are struggling really badly with hypervigilance, intrusive thoughts, nightmares, flashbacks, etc. And you can teach them to manage those things. For instance, one of the best skills per the literature for managing anxiety and related symptoms is called diaphragmatic breathing. Most people with an anxiety disorder or trauma disorder should learn diaphragmatic breathing unless you have sexual trauma down there. However, that's not advice. Don't sue me. However, managing anxiety and associated symptoms with PTSD is not exposure therapy to treat PTSD. So that difference should be crystal clear in everyone's mind. There's managing symptoms through coping skills, etc. And then there's treating the illness. And music is not curing or treating a thing. Music has been a huge part of my journey as a person, personally and professionally. However, you would never catch me in any professional setting saying music is a treatment for X, Y, and Z. And the moment it can be elevated to the level of treatment, I will come back on this podcast. I will tweet about it and say, I was so wrong. I'm so sorry, Nicholas, etc., etc. But please stop elevating things from the level of coping skill, if it's even really that, technically speaking, to the level of treatment. We do not want to mislead people into like trying to, Def Leppard or Tupac or Bach or Chopin away their depression. You cannot Biggie Smalls away your depression. There is no amount of Taylor Swift that's going to cure your depression, gay boys. None of that. I say this because as a bisexual guy in a gay relationship, blah, blah, blah. Like, it's never going to happen. It's never going to happen. Music is going to help you feel better temporarily. Just like all coping skills help us feel better temporarily. And those are awesome and we need them. But calling them treatment is unethical, misleading, and gives people false hope. And that's why it's terrible and stupid. So please ignore people when they make drastic statements like, gosh, people just need to walk more, or gosh, people just need to work out more and that will cure your depression. No, there's no amount of lifting weights that's going to make you not a narcissistic personality disorder patient. You can't cure borderline personality disorder with cold plunge and sauna. It's never happened and it will literally never happen. So there's my soapbox. Mountain Girl says, my trauma therapist cured many of my PTSD symptoms, so now I don't have to manage them. They're gone. That's awesome. I hope whatever it is that worked stays working. Awesome. Okay, so I hope that that's clear to everybody. Thank you all for being here and commenting and sharing. This is fun. Alrighty. Shall we talk? Let's go back to Justin Garson for a second. So 5 days ago, I'm going to retweet it so we can all see it together. Okay. So here's what Justin said 5 days ago. His handle is again at Justin, Justin _ Garson, Garson. Here's what he said. He said, most of what we call, in quotes, mental illness isn't a failure to live up to social norms, but an active revolt against them. We must train ourselves to see its political performative dimension. I don't know if Justin is a psyop. I don't know. Sometimes he says somewhat reasonable things, and sometimes he says absolutely really stupid things. And this is one of them. So I'm going to read it again because it's so mind-bendingly stupid and infuriating that even I have a hard time comprehending what he just said. So sentence 1 of 2 sentences. Sentence 1. Most of what we call mental illness isn't a failure to live up to social norms, but an active revolt against them. So let's talk about that sentence, and then we'll talk to the second one. So most of what we call mental illness is not a revolt against social norms. So people with mental illness are not failing to live up to social norms. They're actively rebelling against them. So a person with major depressive disorder whose brain is so radically under-functioning compared to what it could function, to the point that they cannot get out of bed or they wish they would die all day. That person, for instance, who I've treated someone like that, by the way, that person is revolting against society because he's so biologically basically destroyed by his depression. Makes no sense to me. The person who has horrific flashbacks and nightmares because of their PTSD is revolting against society? That doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense to me. I think that most people with very serious PTSD would rather not have their flashbacks and aren't some radical hippies saying, society sucks, my flashbacks are okay. That's just me. The people I've treated with PTSD are not some kind of super rebels. I mean, there are a few, but like most of them are just like regular people who went through some terrible things which damaged their brain in a way that's manageable and treatable. For instance, people with personality disorders are not some brilliant rebels. Charlie Sheen's a great example, and I'm going to get sued for this probably, but what the fuck, I already said his name. But like people that look and act like him, I'm not diagnosing him, so I have no clue what Charlie's diagnosis is. Don't sue me for the love of God. But Charlie's clearly not a well person. And to say that people like him are just rebelling against society's norms, I think all the drugs and all the less than safe sex and all the domestic violence and all the things that are public record, don't sue me. Like, I think all those things are a little more than just rebelling against society. Like, people with pervasive schizophrenia are not just rebelling against society. So that first sentence, I can't comprehend, because working with very acutely mentally ill people, often with psychosis that they cannot manage on their own, and they've tried and they can't, or people with very serious substance use disorders, so severe that they need a detox so they don't die, like those people don't seem like they're rebelling against anything. It seems like the drugs have corrupted their ability to make sound decisions while they're intoxicated or withdrawing, which I think is a fairly sane, almost like normal take. It's like a normie take, but maybe that's me missing the rebellion in there. Just because people act rebellious doesn't mean they are thoughtfully, consciously rebelling, for instance. Because I've had tons of people who are rebellious in treatment and things like that, and like want to break the rules and have sex with the other patients, which is not really good for anyone's mental health. I've seen those things, but I don't consider that rebellion. I consider that part of their illness. And so, Justin, I would love for you to clarify very specifically what you mean by they're not just failing to live up to social norms, they're actively rebelling against them. That makes no sense to me. I think most people I know that I've treated with severe bipolar, PTSD, depression, substance use issues, personality issues would rather not be that way because their life sucks. Because the majority of the world functions within that first standard deviation of the normal curve. And that doesn't mean that's necessarily optimal. It just means that's how most people function. So you have to fit in with the herd. That's life. I'm not particularly normal. Look at me. Listen to me. However, I have to get along with people who are not like me, or my life is screwed. And that's life. That's been life since time has existed. Since mammals have existed for millions of years on this planet. So what I will tell, or billions, I think. So like, I don't know what to tell you, Justin, but people with serious mental health problems, serious, like hard to treat chronic illnesses are not merely rebelling. That's an insane statement to me, at least. Maybe I'm crazy for reacting this way. It just seems like you're going to hurt people and convince them that their self-destructive patterns are okay. Jonathan says, I have met 0 people who had chronic suicidal ideation and actually wanted to continue living with it. Yeah, me too. No one I've met who had serious, severe treatment-resistant depression wanted to live that way. Not a one. They didn't think they were rebelling against anything. And he continues to say, and generally don't want anyone to see it. They're kind of ashamed of their illness. Kind of eliminates the performance argument. Yeah. So the second thing he said, which I'm also equally confused about, is we must train ourselves to see its political performative dimension. Mental illness is a political performative thing. This is like some Judith Butler nonsense. Like, maybe I'm just so stupid. Professor Lockwood, clinical psychologist, consultant, maybe I'm just so dumb or so dense or so corrupted by my years of training and actually helping people not die. Maybe that's the problem. I'm just corrupted by my own narcissism such that I cannot see how mental illness is performative for society. I don't get it. If someone who watches this can explain it to me like I'm 5, explain it to me like you would tell a 5-year-old, and I'll change my opinion. I'm so happy to change my opinion. The moment someone comes at me hard and is like, listen, you're wrong about this, this, and this, and they make a very sound, simple argument that maybe even has data behind it or a philosophical perspective or something that makes sense, I'm so down. But it makes no sense. How is mental illness performative? Do you mean like the TikTokers who are pretending to be mentally ill? Because that's certainly performative. The YouTubers? That's insane to me. Mountain Girl says, what critical psychiatry gets right is that 95% of the time, skilled intensive therapy is far more effective at actually curing problems. Therapy changed my life and meds just made me worse. Yeah. So there's a lot of people who are over-medicated or on the wrong meds or don't need meds. That's true. So I'm totally with the critical psychiatry movement when they're saying the reasonable thing, which is there's a segment of the population who is over-medicated. There's a segment of the population who doesn't need meds. There's a segment of the population who's never tried therapy, etc. Our system is corrupt and broken. I'm all about all those things. When it goes as far as nobody ever needs meds, or everyone who we call mentally ill is just rebelling against society, like Justin is saying, I don't even know what to say. I can't, like, I lose all conscious critical thinking skills at that point because just it doesn't compute. I can't imagine working in the psych hospital that I worked in and just letting them run free without meds, because they would literally attack each other and kill each other in some cases, because I had to be part of that process of seeing someone get aggressive and try to hurt someone. It sucked. And that person would have probably killed the other person or seriously injured them. So like, I don't know. I don't get it. I don't know. It's like going to the ER and saying they're performing their head trauma. They're performing their profuse bleeding from the neck or the thigh or whatever. Perico, I think, says kind of similar to how a few weeks ago or something, Justin said society calls rage over injustice a personality disorder. Yeah, it's crazy. Like, some people actually have a personality disorder. It's a real thing across cultures and time. There are truly antisocial people. There are truly narcissistic people. They do exist, where they are organized differently than the average person. They score higher than average on trait narcissism or trait agreeableness, or lower on trait agreeableness, etc. Those are real people across culture. We have the research. So it's not made up. I wish it were made up, because then we could just like socially engineer it away. But you can't do that. It's never happened. Mountain Girl says, our system should fund therapy, especially for anyone ready to do the work, not just medication. I agree, 100%. You know, I was actually talking with my colleague, Dr. Scale, about this earlier. It's like, what if we could get Medicaid and Medicare to automatically fund community clinics and interns and trainees so that A, they can make a living wage, because many times people in school learning how to do the job get paid nothing. So they're broke, taking out massive student loans like I have, and they're in crippling amounts of debt doing the work for free while they're in grad school, burning out, trying to make their lives happen. So maybe fund their life with some Medicaid, for instance, perhaps. And make therapy more available. Make it more available. It just needs to be more available. I completely agree. It needs to be more available. The problem is there are a lot of bad therapists. There are a lot of amateur, mediocre people who don't know what they're doing, and they say and do stupid stuff that actually hurts people, or at minimum just doesn't help them. So that's a problem. So I don't have any ill will for Justin. I don't know this person. I have never had an extended conversation with them online, in person, on the phone. So maybe his motives are great. Maybe he's a bot. Maybe he's a real person. Maybe I don't know, and I don't care. All I know is people with serious, especially chronic, persistent mental illness are not performing anything. Yes, they might get stuck in a role because their illness is so severe. However, it's the illness, not society. Society can change as much as you want, but that schizophrenia is still going to be schizophrenia. And we have all this going back to the early 19-teens. And schizophrenia existed back then, 1800s. So much psychiatry research. There's just so much that shows These illnesses have always existed. Now, some of them have changed. Sometimes there are diagnoses in the book that aren't great, aren't really valid. But for the most part, the things that we've seen consistently over time, like personality differences, substance use disorders, bipolar, serious depression, serious PTSD, all these things are real disorders. They're not performative. These people are not rebels against society. I've never worked with a patient with real PTSD who loved their flashbacks, who thought, fuck society, it's okay for me to have flashbacks because flashbacks mean something special about me. No, they think, I wish these would go away because I can't even do my job, or I can't be with my spouse, or I can't play with my kids because I'm so screwed up right now because I can't focus because my flashbacks are destroying me, right? That's what I've experienced. People whose hypervigilance is so intense that they need medication because just diaphragmatic breathing or yoga or whatever doesn't cut it. So I want those people to get the professional help they need so their lives aren't worse, because many of these people with severe mental illnesses die by suicide, either intentionally or accidentally. And that's terrible. And it's a tragedy that otherwise perfectly lovable, valuable, contributing members of society, people who are good people, because their illness is so severe, they die. I don't want them to die. I want them to get the help that they need. They deserve help. So this idea of debasing and diminishing their experience by saying it's performative or something is wild to me. It's like a Judith Butler move. And we all know how lovely that lady is. So I don't know. Maybe I should be canceled for that, for having an outrageous opinion like people who have serious mental illnesses need real medical help, you know? It's like a Christian Science thing where it's like, let the kid with cancer die because they should just be able to pray it away. Like, okay, cool. I don't know where it says that in the Bible, but okay. Maybe I missed it. I don't know. I'm definitely not a religious scholar, as you can tell by all the cursing and burping. All right. So I think the last... let's see. So just before I get to my final article for today, Perico says, I see how people my age and an undergraduate student don't really know what therapy is, which contributes to the issue of people not receiving the right care / people misunderstanding what constitutes effective treatment for mental illness. Yeah, if you don't know what therapy really is, then you might not even seek it out. The therapy speak we see online has watered down psychotherapy in the public eye. Absolutely. I'm all anti-therapy speak. I just think it's terrible. I think therapy speak is, using even professional terms outside of professional context, I think is very bad. I think if you have a license to be a clinician at the master's level, the doctorate level, the MD level, whatever, if you're a KDAC or a drug counselor, I encourage you to not use professional lingo in social settings. I don't think it's useful because I think the more we dilute these terms, the more people, because it's not psychoeducation when you're talking to your friends or you're screwing around online. Like, it's not the same. So we should never do that. That's why I don't like all these influencers and Instagram therapists and shit. It's just stop it. So I agree with you, Perico. I do. All right, so the final thing I want to talk about today is one of my good colleagues at my university, very smart guy, in my opinion at least, sent me this interesting new article that I'm going to talk about right now. Okay, so the article is from a website that I've never seen before, called The Hedgehog Review, Critical Reflections on Contemporary Culture. So, never heard of it. I also don't know the author, so I have no preconceived biases. So the author's name is Phil Christman, or Christman, I don't know. Christman. And the article is titled, What is it like to be a man? So I'm not going to read the article because that's crazy. I just want to point out a couple of things that he says that are worth discussing because, the Twitter world, the YouTube world, the influencer world on Instagram is full of many different types of men, right? And many different types of commentators of all, backgrounds, cultures, ages, sexes, talking about men and masculinity. Masculinity has become a growing topic, probably thanks to people like Andrew Tate, Jordan Peterson, Joe Rogan, Andrew Huberman, Chris Williamson, all these people, right? There's all these big podcaster, influencer people who have brought masculinity into the forefront of the Western dialogue in the culture war and so on and so forth. And so it's interesting because there was a long time, the 80s and 90s, where, women's rights, femininity, etc., became more and more important. And so it seems like there's now kind of a backlash or a counter reaction where now it's like, what happened to men, right? Because you've got all these authors writing about men and boys. You've got Jonathan Haidt's data about it. You've got all this data that says, in many ways, men in the United States and other Western countries are kind of falling behind. So women outnumber men by a large margin at college, for instance. Now, is that good? Is it bad? I don't know. Probably not good to have a disproportionate amount of one or the other. But once upon a time, 50s, 60s, 70s, men outnumbered women in college, right? And so there's a lot of complicated statistical, demographic arguments we can make about men and masculinity and times changing and cultural ethos and all this stuff, which I'm not a sociologist. I'm not a philosopher, whatever. I'm a clinical psychologist by trade. I'm a professor, consultant, whatever. Like, it's not really my thing to have opinions about sociology or macro level society. I don't really do that. It's just not my gig. I'm here trying to talk about mental health and what's like pseudoscientific garbage that won't actually help people with mental health problems. That's the point of this podcast. So all that preamble aside, here's some interesting things he said and why men's mental health may be impacted by this article if people are reading it en masse. So I want to give this person, his name again is Phil Christman. Just to give him a shout out, he talked about a very important paradox. So in the last 10 or so years, there's this interesting paradox where it's like women rule and women can be strong and women can be superheroes and women can be all this stuff, right? All these things, I don't really care. Societal commentation, not my thing. But the paradox is men are supposed to know their place. But as he says in this article, so men are supposed to be simultaneously very strong, powerful providers, blah, 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 but also know their place and shut up. And not really be, super strong, super confident, whatever, because like women need to be brought up and encouraged and strengthened, right? So it's like, there's kind of this weird paradox of like, you're supposed to be awesome, but you're also supposed to know your place. And so the problem is the average person is not really that smart or that capable of looking at how they overcorrect or undercorrect, because the average person is average, right? And so a lot of men are going to struggle with this paradox because most people are not particularly bright or insightful or capable of taking care of themselves in their relationships and being like their best self at all times or whatever. It's just not how humans are designed. So the new masculine paradox is be awesome, but also shut up. Be a protector, but also don't protect. Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's like many men, like he describes, are kind of feeling stuck. It's like, I'm supposed to be a provider, but my wife is also supposed to be a provider, right? And so now masculinity is not this one-dimensional role like it used to be, is kind of the point that he's making, which I think is valid. Another thing he says is the perverse avoidance of comfort, right? And so there's this interesting conflation of masculinity and stoicism. Which, whatever, again, philosophy aside, culture war aside, what I've seen with a lot of my male patients is it's really important to look at what they think their role is supposed to be in society, in their relationships, in their family, and how adaptive it is for them, right? So many people do feel ashamed for their role because there's a large swath of society that says you're such a terrible person for wanting to be typically masculine. So the American Psychological Association shot itself right in the foot. I don't know when it was, but they made this terrible, post about toxic masculinity, which many of my colleagues, including myself, created a video to criticize. It's just stupid. So like, are males supposed to care more about avoiding discomfort or like being stoic or whatever more than females? No, that's dumb. But there are some social roles that we have traditionally occupied across many cultures and times and spaces that involve certain types of risk-taking, certain types of pain tolerance that women typically don't. That seems to be a case. There's evolutionary psych literature that confirms that. There's anthropology literature that confirms that. And so it's nuanced and it's not that simple. So what I will tell you is this article is interesting and worth reading. There's a lot I don't agree with. There's some bad mouthing and bashing of Jordan Peterson, which is always interesting because sometimes it's projection and sometimes it's real. And I think he does that, both. He does both those things, projecting and real. But what I will say is, if you care about men's mental health, you will try to understand them first as opposed to fantasizing about them wildly. So if you want healthier men and you want healthier masculinity, the first thing you should do, in my clinical opinion, in my personal opinion, is you should try to understand the needs of men. Because not all males come from the same backgrounds with the same beliefs about masculinity. Many different cultures on the planet in the United States of America have different views on masculinity based upon ethnicity or nationality or race, based upon sexuality, and so on and so forth. All these different influences are admixtures to the concept of masculinity that affect how it's displayed and understood and enacted. So maybe, as opposed to projecting wildly like I think he does in his article in many cases, maybe, just maybe, ignore the bullshit on Twitter, ignore the Andrew Tates of the world, ignore the angry third wave feminists of the world, and actually talk to men and ask them what they think their role should be and try to negotiate what is adaptive for them in their context and their culture. That seems like an effective thing to do, but what would I know? Jonathan Cogburn says, in some cases, it's men be more like women, but still be strong and protective. Right, that's the paradox he's talking about, which is a double bind, right? So maybe don't put anyone, men or women, straight or gay or trans or whatever, into a double bind. That seems stupid. Don't do that. That's bad for people. That's what I would say. Stop with the paradoxes and the double bind. Treat people with respect. Try to understand them. I know that's a wild idea, but maybe if we try to understand people, as opposed to projecting or assuming, you know what they say about assuming? It makes an ass out of you and me. Just maybe, we can treat people with the respect they deserve, regardless of gender or sexuality or age or whatever, by just trying to understand them and their unique experiences. Call me a bigot for thinking that, but I don't know, just seems to be helpful. Seems to work for me. All right. So that's my ranting for the day. Thank you so much for coming and showing up, commenting. A couple of you came and commented and chatted. That was awesome. Thank you as always. Makes things more fun and more interesting and more lively. If you found this helpful or interesting or useful or funny or whatever, please like, share, and subscribe so that we can get the word out to more people, so that more people cannot be hurt by pseudoscience, misinformation, conservative garbage, woke garbage, whatever. It's all garbage. There's so much garbage that's not scientifically grounded in principles and grounded in ethics. There's so much pop psychology, pseudopsychology. Please, let's make reasonable approaches to mental health the norm. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to help people not get hurt by their professionals, not get hurt by the anti-psychiatry and the pro-psychiatry people, etc., etc., etc. I just want to protect the consumers and have reasonable perspectives. Okay? So thank you for being here. I'll see you next Saturday. And as always, I like to end this with a joke because I think humor is important for people's general well-being. So, without further delay, I once had this patient who, believe it or not, was phobic, afraid of, terrified of the sun. And yes, this person was not a vampire. Don't worry. Vampires aren't real. So anyways, this patient was terrified of the sun. And basically what happened was one of his parents died of skin cancer because of overexposure to the sun. And so I think trauma induced this particular phobia. Happens sometimes. So the standard treatment for most phobias is exposure therapy. And so we worked via telehealth because he was literally shut into his place. He did not leave his apartment. He had groceries ordered in. He had a job that he did over the computer. He never left his place. He blacked out his entire place, blackout curtains. So no sunlight, only artificial light. So he was terrified of the sun. That's how terrified he was. So we started to do, our sessions, and I, explain what exposure therapy is and how, exposure helps with phobia. And he started to understand and appreciated it. And after the first couple of sessions, we did the psychoeducation. We did the first couple of exposures, and it went pretty well. He opened the blinds. He ripped down one of the blackout curtains. And finally, we're getting to the point where we're going to get him to go outside and be in real sun. So this was the big exposure, which might have actually put him over the edge into like a healthier relationship with the sunlight. And so once we finally got to the point where we're preparing for him to go outside, we're on the Zoom session. He's ready to go outside with me sitting here to help him cope, etc., etc. He gets up from the computer. He opens his front door. He walks outside, and unfortunately, he is blinded by the sun, and he falls over and he breaks his wrist. Really shitty. Really terrible. So he has to go to the hospital, come back and see him next week. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, are you okay? What happened? Da, 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 da. And he's like, I don't think I want to do therapy anymore. And I said, that makes sense. You got hurt. It was terrible. Probably traumatized you worse now. And I said, is there anything else that you think we could try? Is there anything you're willing to do? Get back on the exposure hierarchy, try new exposures. She's like, well, do you have any more bright ideas? All right. Have a good day. Take good care of yourselves. Eat good food. Get good sleep. Get exercise. And I will see you.